So thank you very much indeed, Mercedes, for the time and generosity. I'm really pleased to talk to you. And I have some introductory notes about you. You can add if there is something missing, and then we can start with the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, Mercedes Valmisa is an assistant professor of philosophy at Gettysburg College. Her work focuses on philosophy of action and social philosophy. In her writing, she's interested in expanding the ways we think about agency through multicultural and interdisciplinary lenses. From there was a beautiful part in the epilogue of the latest book, your latest book. I quote from that. You say, I teach philosophy at a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, where I have the opportunity to share my approach to philosophy with my students. The way I see it, philosophy is fundamentally anti-dogmatic. It is about conceiving well-formulated questions, whether fresh questions or new takes on old ones, adapted to our ever-changing circumstances that clarify concepts, disambiguate possibilities, and dissect beliefs that, despite being problematic, have grown too comfortable and unchallenged. End of quote from the beautiful epilogue. So she has authored two books, as far as I know, adapting a Chinese philosophy of action and All Things Act. I read these two books and I'm really happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Maddie, for your interest and for having this conversation with me.
My pleasure, absolute pleasure. So I start with the first uh, uh, question, non-question, I don't know how to call it, but so adopting a Chinese philosophy of action is your first full-length monograph dedicated to exploring how classical Chinese philosophy redefines the nature of action, focusing less on individual agency and more on relational, interconnected dynamics. I know that we can never recall all which has brought us to writing a book, but what are the things, Mercedes, you can share with us in coming to this topic in your personal and intellectual trajectory?
Well, that's an interesting question, and there is so much I could say about that. This was because this first monograph, it was a rewriting of my dissertation, right, for my PhD. But actually, the topic of it, the adapting, it's something that I started thinking about when I was doing my master's at Taida in Taiwan, National Taiwan University in Taipei, right? So I did a master's in Chinese philosophy there before coming to the US for my PhD. And it was like sitting in these classes, reading the classics, with, all my classmates who knew the classics by heart. And we were like having all these discussions that I came to see adapting as like a continuing thread through all these different texts that are typically thought of as belonging to different schools of thought and like having different approaches and ideas. But I thought, well, but I keep finding this notion of adapting as a philosophy of action. I wasn't thinking in terms of philosophy of action quite yet back then, but I had like this notion of adapting and how it kept coming back, right, through all these different texts from different schools. And when I was doing my PhD, I already knew I wanted to explore that further, right? So it really came from my first formal engagement with the classical Chinese texts in this context of actually reading and discussing them in Taiwan. And then with a more like traditional kind of approach to them and engagement. And then like, with everything that I was like the training I was receiving in my PhD program and exploring that further, I started to think of Chinese philosophy more through the lenses of philosophy of action, right? I saw not only adapting, but that action, acting, performing, and thinking about strategies to be effective, right, in one's actions and also collective action were like very prominent themes. And it was like a really good angle to understand or like read in a new light a lot of these classics that have been like, like studied and discussed so much. So that's
Right.
how, things
Yeah.
came together. And then I started thinking like further on as I was like rewriting my dissertation, making a book out of it, like started thinking of it more in like formal terms of like, this is actually a philosophy of action. And it is a philosophy of action, sorry, that it's very different from what we find in the analytic context or the Anglo-European context.
All right, wonderful. So basically, a very naive digression now. What is the problem with the analytical approach to action?
Well, I don't think of it in terms of a program. I think like it is, like the dominant way to look at action in the analytic tradition as contemporary philosophers do it now, is thinking of action as something individual, right? And also thinking of agency as a capacity that only humans have, right? So for something to count as an action properly and not as a mere doing or an event, there needs to be an agent, an actor that knows what they are doing, knows why they're doing it, and then they can plan ahead in order to perform the action and succeed in achieving the goal. And then this same actor must be also able to kind of justify their action, right? Or rationalize it. So to act on reasons and to be able to explain those reasons to others. Why did I do what I was doing, right? What are my reasons to behave that way? And only then, when we meet these conditions of intentionality, right? Rationality, then we can say that we have a proper action, right? This is to separate what is an actor and an action from everything else that we see happening in the world every day, all the movements, all the doings that are, happening around us and in us all the time. And I don't see that approach as a problem per se. I don't like that, that more confrontational attitude. But I think it's very fruitful and it opens up a lot of, very interesting conversations and also to understand as humans actors, it's very important as well. But I see it in a somewhat limiting way, right? So my approach, which differs from it, is not meant to replace that understanding of action or to make it obsolete or to confront it in any way, but rather to expand it, to say, okay, we can look at it from this perspective, but when we look at it from a different perspective, we then suddenly can learn a whole lot of new things that we simply were not able to see from this other more limiting angle.
Right. Wonderful. Great. Again, a non-question. I'm quoting you. Early Chinese philosophers devise and practice a form of relational action that we do not find in other philosophical traditions, and which I have termed adaptive agency or adapting. Yin, I think is the pronunciation. A preliminary definition of the concept of adapting states that adapting is abandoning oneself and taking entities as standard. End of quote. So I don't know what is your non-answer to my non-question.
So exactly. So adapting is like a philosophy of action, a strategy of action that comes kind of in a logical way out of the premises on how these philosophers in classical China are understanding the world. So if they start from an understanding of the world that is what we call relational, right? They don't start from thinking about individual things or individual entities like persons and objects that then enter into relations with one another, but they do the opposite. They start by thinking of the world in terms of there are all these things happening, all these relations and all these interconnections. And then as a result or as a function of certain relations, then individual things emerge, right? So if we like completely shift the focus, like they do, those metaphysical assumptions being so different, then they lead to an understanding of an actor and an action that is going to be very different, right, from what I described that happens in the analytic tradition, right? So if the analytic philosopher starts from an understanding that I'm an individual entity, I am a person, and I have this capacity, I own this capacity called agency, and that agency gets manifested in my individual actions. I act upon the world, right? I can do things in the world, and I can use things and reason about how to use these things to achieve my goals. Now, in classical China, because we start from a completely different understanding of what is a person and these metaphysical assumptions about the world, then when we think about an actor or an agent, it is not this individual, right, that has this capacity to act, but rather the agent is always a participant in a collective that together cooperates to raise certain actions, right? So the premises that we find and that I was describing or presenting for the first time in this book in Adapting, right? But then I have explored much further in the second book, is that we never act together, right? Like there is no individuals acting together. So whenever we say there's been an action on this is an action, we are actually saying this is a co-action, right? There is no such thing as an individual action or an individual actor. And even like in the most basic things that we do, like I'm talking to you right now, or I sit in this chair, right? I get up, all of these actions that I typically attribute to myself, like I am doing these things, they're co-acted. And then you may wonder, well, who am I co-acting with, right? Who are the other actors that are collaborating with me in helping this action emerge? And sometimes it's other humans, right? Or non-human living beings. But often, most often, it's just things, right? It's like the things that are in our environment, everything from, like more abstract entities like social and political structures and institutions to real concrete material objects like a pen that I may have in my hand, right? Like this laptop and everything in our environment, right? So this is the second premise that we find, not only that we are not individual actors, we are always co-acting along with others, but that these others that we co-act with, they are also non-humans, right? Things also act, and they act, of course, in a non-intentional way. So then it's already leading to what we may say a redefinition of action, but for the classical Chinese context, if there is no redefinition, it's like just like the definition, right? But we can use it, like bringing it into the present to have a more expanded understanding of action. Not only intentional actions are our intentional doings are actions, but there is also non-intentional actions and actors, right?
Right.
So when you have these two premises, which are more like assumptions, right, about the world, it's like they're metaphysical assumptions. Then adapting is a normative claim, right, that is raised on top of those premises. So the idea is that, well, if you're never acting alone, if you don't have the power by yourself to make things happen, but you're always participating in this course of action with other things, then it is better for you, if you want to be an effective agent, right, to take into account the doings of other things, how they participate in your actions, what is their impact, what are they contributing, right? What is their behavior, their powers, their dispositions. And when you take all that into account, then you can co-create or co-produce more fitting courses of action, right? That are going to be more effective. So it's kind of like, it's like good advice, It's like, well, if the world looks this way, then you better act in this way, right? And because those metaphysical assumptions are so different, then they lead to a completely different model of action and agency.
Right. Yet, Mercedes, I have the impression that you make a difference between the commonplace understanding of spontaneity and being adaptive. I quote you somewhere in the first book, Adapting. You say that adaptability in turn requires abandoning fixed patterns of thinking evaluating, and feeling that may obstruct the most suitable response. But this is achieved through purposive thinking, evaluating, and feeling. The adaptive response is pondered, examined, and mediated, a self-aware and intentional form of exercising agency that can be explained. So, uh, although later you talk about skilled spontaneity as a result of maximizing inherent natural capacity, but could you be uh, uh, a bit clear about it? If there is any difference, in your opinion, between spontaneity and being adaptive?
Right. Yeah. So that for me was a very important distinction to clarify because spontaneity is such a central concept in classical Chinese philosophy. Like this is concept of 自然, right? That is translated as self-so or self-caused action or simply spontaneity, right? Acting with spontaneity. And because this is so central and there are so many discussions about this, it was very important for me to clarify how adapting, as I was reconstructing this strategy for action in the classical Chinese text, how it is different from that, right? So spontaneity in classical Chinese philosophy is the result of having trained. So this is the skillful kind, right? Of having trained in acting in certain ways so that at a certain point, you don't have to think about the action anymore. You kind of like your body knows what to do, right? Or your mind knows what to do without intentionally, deliberately controlling the action. So the most kind of illuminating examples come from playing sports or playing music, right? So if you're training as a swimmer or a basketball player, when you're in the field and you're competing in a game, you don't want to be thinking like, I should do this or I should do that. Should I ponder my options? No, you kind of like you have been trained for so long that your body knows what to do, right? And actually in those moments, if you stop and think and you try to rationally, deliberately control the action, that may result is counterproductive, right? It's gonna like stop the flow, the fluency of the action, right? So this is spontaneity. It's something that you react or respond to a situation, in a situation where there may be many shifts and changes and challenges, but you can respond to it in a highly effective manner without having to deliberately think and make choices, right? And it is counterproductive even to do those. Now, adapting it's different from that because it doesn't require any set of skills, right? So we can say, well, a basketball player who has been training and has now this high level of skill, right, in playing basketball, he is or she is adapting in the field at the court, right, to all the changes as a result of this. But a normal person, like an ordinary person without those skills, would not be able to do that, right? So spontaneous action is completely dependent on certain training, on certain know-how, right? That is acquired over the years. It doesn't need to be so technical. We all know how to walk, right? We all know how to kind of like jump or even like talk. These are things that we have learned to do. We have been trained, right, in doing when we were kids. And now we can do with a high level of proficiency without thinking about it, right? I don't need to think like I'll move my right foot and then I will move the other one, right? I just kind of do it naturally, spontaneously. Now with adapting, the thing is like I don't require any particular skills, but it is a question really of assessing and evaluating a situation and being open. So that is the part about not falling into prejudice or into like prefixed conceptions about what things are and how they're going to behave and what I should expect from them, but rather take in what the situation is offering you and respond to it by taking into account those dispositions and contributions from every other actor in your situation, in your environment. right? So it does not require any set of skills, and it is a course of action that can be much deliberate and intentional, right? It's as it can also sometimes not be as a result of that habit, right? Of that skill and training. But it is not tied to any particular set of skills or any particular context.
Right. Thank you. That helps me, but I come back to it later. I go to another question. I start with quoting you. We don't know. Uh, Sorry, that's not the quote. That's my sentence. I start with my sentence and then to your quote. So my claim is that it seems that we don't know whether being useful or useless is going to help us or save us, according to Zhuangzi and other Taoist books or classical text, Chinese text. So the tree lives because it is useless, but the goose dies because it is
Useful.
it is useful actually. Yeah, I mean it's or let's say
No, it's
it's
the opposite. It's the
yeah, yeah. It's
opposite.
I mean its uselessness makes it die, let's say,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
But in the case of tree, its uselessness makes it survive. That's my
Yes.
point, yeah. So this
Mhm.
is a paradox Zhuangzi offers. Um, so it seems being adaptive has nothing directly to do with being useful in that sense, yeah. In fact,
Mhm.
usefulness does not always turn out to work, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Here I'm quoting you, being adaptive means that one might sometimes show instrumental qualities while other times display an absolute lack of them. Adapting precisely consists in not adhering to any particular standard of action and learning from context and situation which course would temporarily work best. Looking back at the three anecdotes of among humans from this perspective, we realize that the value of usefulness they vindicate is not an absolute value. Agents must not be constrained by conventional thinking that represents certain things as good and others as bad, but they must not fall into the opposite extreme of unconventionality either. The risk of polarizing is that agents get trapped in yet another fallacy. The key lies in the capacity to acknowledge that all patterns of action can be useful at certain times and context. Sorry, that was a long code, but it's not a question. If you have anything to add to that, it would be because that's a very interesting example, a very interesting paradox, let's say, that none of them are reliable, usefulness and uselessness. None of them are guaranteeing anything.
Yeah, and this makes people very nervous. Like when I teach this kind of stuff to my students, it's like, well, but there must be something that is absolutely true. There must be something that is absolutely valuable, right? And our job as philosophers to find it. Well, that is, a normal concern, and it is like a very, it comes up a lot whenever I'm having these conversations. In this case, we're talking specifically about the transit, right? With this story about the tree and the goose that you were mentioning. But to me, this is also part of like, these are like my ontological commitments as well, right? That are very much in line with the transit. There is no absolute way in which things are, right? So things are neither this or that, but really both, right? And they allow for different ways of engaging with them, different perspectives through which to understand them and value them. And they really have the capacity to become this or not this, sometimes at the same time, depending, like by coexisting opposite perspectives, right? Being engaged with them. So this goes also for values. There is no absolute values that can guide you through your life that are always going to be reliable, right? This is something that we also find in another text that is also foundational Taoist text, the Tao Te Ching, right? Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, where you see like the Tao, like the path, the course that can be named or becomes determined or becomes affirmed. It just undermines itself. It cannot act as a reliable guide, right? So this is the same kind of principle that we see in the transcend, that we see at the basis of adaptive agency, right? Is the conviction that there is absolutely nothing, no concept, no idea, no value, no principle that will reliably help you through your life in all situations that you may encounter. So you have to remain open to learning from the situation what is the best response that you can co-create in that situation collectively with everything else. So this is an important point because in mainstream classical Chinese philosophy, then being useful, this is what the Confucians want, for example, right? You want to become this educated person who has like a political role to play, who can change the world, who can do something positive, have an impact. You want to be useful, right? And then in Taoism, it seems like you find this counter value of usefulness. If you're not useful, then people won't take advantage of you. This is like the case of the tree that cannot be used to make something with it, so it doesn't get cut down. But with adaptive agency, we don't stay there. We don't stay at saying, okay, there's a counter value. It is better to be useless than useful. So that you can be more free, so that you can be, like just yourself without having to fit into all these molds and social roles and so on. But that's also not going to work, right? That's the point of the transit. It's not going to work always. So you have to be kind of empty, which is a concept metaphor also in classical Chinese philosophy of fasting the heart mind, remaining empty, or forgetting things, right? In order to fight against these patterns that of behaving and thinking and perceiving and feeling, right? That get solidified over time, and actually be open-minded to understanding what the situation requires from you. So it is a way of acting that in being intentional and deliberate, and it can involve evaluation, at the same time is allowing for the situation to organize you, right, as one more element in it, as opposed to you raising yourself as like the controller, right? Like the authority of what's going to happen and how it's going to be done. So you are allowing things to inform you what is the best course of action so that you can participate in it as well.
Yeah, wonderful, great. When I was younger in Iran, I was always like puzzled, let's say, by the fact that uh, Spinoza and following Spinoza, Deleuze was like constantly emphasizing on the fact of being affected, being influenced. And sometimes it is even for me more understandable when I expose myself to such texts that letting the situation organize you is actually the biggest that you can attain, right?
Yes.
Not trying to control and influence in advance, yeah?
Yes.
That really helps, even sheds light on other philosophical themes. And Mercedes, another metaphor that um, I can say that in both your books I could see the traces of is the metaphor of mirror, actually mirror, the function of mirror. And it is helpful because just now you talked about this fact of emptiness, and you also talked about this kind of like fasting heart mind. Uh, and even in the second book, I mean, towards the end of the second book, you also talk about the rock, mirror, and fish. These three functions that I really found so beautiful. Um, it is mirror is very interesting to me. Recently, I also talked to another scholar. You probably know Livia Cohn. Yeah, so a really great conversation I had with her, and even there, I talked about mirror and the function of mirror because it is also very much present in Persian poetry and literature, this metaphor. And it also always fascinated me, even in our lifestyle, to be honest. So another important metaphor scheme I used to discuss adapting is the still water mirror, right?
Yeah.
The first chapter of, if I pronounce it correctly, Huainanzi, or
Finance.
Huainanzi,
Yes.
right? Huainanzi, contrasts the coercing mode of interaction with the adaptive mode through the conceptual image of a mirror reflecting shapes. The Shenzi also uses the metaphor of mirror to discuss the way of adapting. So, quoting, when a mirror is set clear, it does not impose any action, yet the attractive and unattractive are established of themselves. When the scale is set even, it does not impose any action, yet the light and the heavy are obtained of themselves. In general, in the way of adapting, the private and the public do not intervene in the world's affairs, yet all under the heaven thrives of itself. End of quote. So again, I would be thankful if you kindly elaborate on the role of mirror, the role of still water mirror in both your books and in this whole thinking of adapting.
Yeah, so the mirror, like you said, and you were quoting, I would also be very interested to see how in Iran, like that metaphor of the mirror, whether it is similar or it goes in a completely different direction. But so the thing with the mirror that we find is that it does neither like welcome things particularly, meaning it has no preference, right? But it also it has no preference for like which things to reflect, right? But at the same time, anything that comes in touch with it or engage with it, and there is a reflection, it also let those things go, not storing any images, right? So it welcomes everything, it doesn't store anything. And that's the key. When we think about this as a metaphor, sorry, for the heart mind, right? This concept like for how we think and feel and perceive the world, it's the idea of not having any preferences, right? Don't like being completely equanimous about all and any states of the world, anything that may happen, any sort of relations in which you may enter, not having any prejudice, any prejudgment, whether it is positive or negative, or any like sort of necessary expectations about how things should be and what should happen, right? Like a prefixated course of action. Like imagine when we go into situations that are familiar to us, that we have done something like for a long time, it's like we already know what we're doing and we go into this situation kind of knowing how it's going to unfold, right? We're not open-minded to discover and see what's going to happen. But it's something that we do already like kind of automatically, right? So the idea of welcoming everything and not having any, prefixed expectations and judgments, it's like trying to shake you out of that habit of doing things always in the same way, right? So that you become open to learning from things. And then there is this other aspect of not getting attached to things, right? So the mirror is reflecting everything, but things keep moving, right? And then they go, and as they go, then you don't try to for them like to stay the same or to stay related to you or like to create in your mind those patterns, right? Expecting that they will repeat in the future, right? So this is it's an image for how we relate to others and relate to things, and that can be very useful. And once again, I would say it's not useful always. And I don't think that's the point of the Chuanzi or any other text when they point it out. It's not something that we should do always and that's always going to work out. But there are certain situations when you want to be more open-minded, when you go into a situation that is completely new for you. And then you have to really pay attention and learn from everything that is around you in order to find like your role there and your position there, right? In that new structure. And it's also useful when we want to resist those patterns of behavior that have been solidified over time and that have become more automatized. And we want to like shake ourselves out of them a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you. I was just thinking that there is a kind of, there is a kind of honesty. I don't know if I call it honesty, but not really in the sense of like moral honesty in a philosophy, which tells to you in advance that nothing is going to be always, or let's say, nothing is always use, or not always usefulness is permanent, and not always uselessness is permanent. So there is a kind of honest confession in that philosophy that can even be applied to that philosophy. Even from above, you can be applied to its own philosophy from outside. That okay, this philosophy told me in advance, so I can take it seriously, even in application to that philosophy. Like your point about mirror, as you said.
Exactly. And the point of adapting as a, highly relational, highly effective form of action is that it's starting from that acknowledgement. It's saying, everything is changing all the time. Things don't repeat. Even when they seem to be repeating, they're still different because it's never the same actors exactly, the same situation exactly. There are elements that change, and that change is potentially what is like the response or our contribution, no, to that situation. So if everything is continuously like shifting and transforming, there is nothing that is absolute, and there is nothing that is that is not absolute in the sense that that is not relative to something else. When things are relative to something else, then they depend on something else to be what they are, right? And if everything is changing, then like what is going to emerge as a result of these changing relations is never going to be the same exactly, right?
Yeah, and it can be. Sorry to interrupt you, but it can also be applied. It can also be applied to adapting itself, right?
No, but the thing is with adapting, at least this is the claim that we find, right, in classical Chinese philosophy that I kind of buy into, is that adapting is a procedural form of action. It has no content. There is not, like actions that are adaptive per se, just because of the content or the form of that action. Adapting is just saying like, you're never going to follow the same pattern or course of action, but you're always going to be responsive to those elements, like trying to avail yourself of those like powers, dispositions of things in your environment to co-create that course of action that seems more fitting, right? But there is no prescription on how to do that, right? So it's like saying like the only thing that doesn't change is that there is change, right? It's something like that. It's saying, well, if you adapt, then you are gonna be utilizing change always to your favor by virtue of not ignoring it, right? Just by virtue of being very perceptive of how things participate in whatever is going on, and not thinking of yourself as the one, like the orchestra director who's like, organizing everything and controlling everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I absolutely see your point. But perhaps my reaction was to the dominant discourse of that you also mentioned in the book of flow in the American understanding of flow, and also something that I sense also in the Deleuzian, post-Deleuzian understanding of like rhizome, that you can simply as a prescription that you only have to connect things, and you only have to be open to things. So even there is a bias at work. That's my point, because there is a content, as you said, but what you said, it's without content. It's like the process itself.
Exactly. And so there some of the actions that are considered adaptive, they may be like the most like ritualized and strictly controlled kind of actions. Like imagine that you go to, and these examples that come from the classical Chinese text, you go to a funeral, right, from a close friend, and you want to behave like in the ritualized way, acting exactly as it is expected of you, like dressing properly, acting properly, speaking properly, as it is called for that situation. Because your goal in that situation is not really to challenge anything or to disrupt anything, but it's really to, collaborate in creating those channels, those technologies to express grief, and also support to the people who are affected by death, right? In that moment. If that is your goal, then the best course of action, the adaptive course of action, is actually to follow the ritual performance, right? And the ritual principles, and don't do anything else than that. And then, so from an exterior point of view, it may seem like, oh, this is not an adaptive agent, because it seems like so, inflexible, controlled, not responding spontaneously to situations. But the agent is responding to the situation in the way that fits better the goals and the other participants in it.
Absolutely. It's like if I'm not wrong, it's like practicing skill. It's like preparing yourself. It's like, yeah. So in order to be adaptive, sometimes we have to practice more, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order
You,
to,
you know what it's called for, right?
right,
If your goal, for example, with the example of the funeral, it's if your goal is really to participate of this like formal way of expressing grief and so on and so forth, then you better follow the ritual rules, right? You go through the ritual without doing anything that seems like inadequate to it, right?
right,
Now, imagine that it is the opposite, like in the case that in some stories that we find in the trance, where some people want to disrupt the very idea that death is something to be mourned, right? That death is not something negative. So why should we be sad about someone leaving or transforming into something else, right? And then that person that has that goal may, instead of participating in the rituals, may disrupt it, right? Because it's another way of engaging with the situation, leading to another kind of goal,
right.
right? So it really depends on examining all these factors, including what is it that, where is the trajectory that you want to create? Where is it that you want to go?
Absolutely. Thanks. That was really helpful. The example of funeral was really helpful. Before going to the second book actually and focusing more there, there was something in this book I wanted to ask you. I hope I can formulate it best. Um, uh, Perhaps the question is anachronistic because I am asking this question in relation to classical Chinese texts, but I'm asking about your take. I would be thankful if you tell me what is the, let's say, metaphysics behind being adaptive in the sense that uh, is it only uh, endorsing a kind of vitalism? Is it like going towards being more efficient? Is it the path towards more happiness? Or you can perhaps tell me that no, like in those texts, being effective and being happy and being efficacious or being immortal, they're all I mean, they are all interconnected. Perhaps it is my modern view that is separating them from each other. But it was the question I wanted to ask you. I hope it is not as naive, but I would be
Well,
happy to know
you're
your answer.
actually putting the finger into something that it's kind of problematic. There are two ways, let's say, of thinking about this. And both ways can be completely like supported by the evidence that we find in the classical texts and the our analysis of them, right? So one way is to think like when you behave, you act in this adaptive way, you are also not only being effective in achieving your goals, whatever they are, but you're doing so in a way that does not harm others and that helps others also achieve their goals and participate in courses of action that are beneficial for everyone, right? So, mm, in a sense, acting adaptively, it has like almost like a moral component in which you are not how you say, like opposing things and trying to control them, but you are really going along with how they are and like taking full advantage of that in enabling also achieving your goals, right? But you are not undermining things, controlling them, or harming them in doing that. That could be like a more individualistic way of action, right? I want to achieve this, so I will like cut as many heads as I need to get myself there, right? What classical Chinese philosophy tells you is that that might seem very straightforward to just act on kind of on your own force and power, but you're deluding yourself. It may be successful a couple of times, but over time you will realize that it is not even like helping you achieve your goals. It's gonna come back and be counterproductive, right? So you are not gonna be able to be successful in acting in those ways. So these things that you're saying, can they all be seen as together, like being effective, being successful, being powerful, right? We have many examples of like political leaders, for example, right, and other kind of leaders in the classical Chinese literature that achieve that kind of power position precisely by relying on the actions of other people and other things, right? Not trying to get individual control over things. So being effective, being powerful, being authoritative, influential, and at the same time not harming and even enabling other things and other humans as well to, to nurture their lives, to live joyfully and peacefully, and so on. These things are not separated. This is in one reading, right? This is like, I would say, like the most generous and positive reading of it. At the same time, as a procedural form of action, adapting can be used for any goals that you want, right? For anything that you want. And some of those instrumental goals may be harmful for other people or for other beings, right? So it's a way of effective action that is not necessarily linked to any conception of morality, right? And therefore it can be applied to anything. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you certainly for this distinction that you make. But I was thinking that, look, today we are. I recently had interview with Simon Critchley, the American philosopher, on his recent book, 2024, actually, Mysticism. And there, I was telling him that we have this tendency to make distinction between happy life, meaningful life, and then mystic life, in that sense, spiritual life that we were discussing. So I admit that perhaps my questions concerning classical Chinese texts can be very much coming from my perspective as a contemporary male Iranian living in Europe, definitely, yeah. But it was curious for me that are really being adaptive, being effective, being happy, having a meaningful life, they are really separate, or they are all unanimous and harmonious? They are all under the word of harmony, understandable in Chinese texts like Zhuangzi or Tao Te Ching.
And yeah, no, so that's a great question. And I think there is a tension there. I don't think there is like one definitive way to answer that question. I think like the sources that we have, the different texts that we have, they tackle that question and they have different answers to it. There are different positions, right? So this is also something that it's always important to remark, because classical Chinese philosophy or Asian philosophy in general is not so well known, right, in Europe or in North America and so on. We may think that there is like one way in which classical Chinese philosophy is, or Chinese philosophy is this or that, right? But there is just as much tension and as much like contradiction and debate and opposition in between different views, right, in classical China as you may find like in any time period in the history of philosophy in Europe, right? So it's more of like, for me, as a contemporary interpreter of these texts, do I want to read it this way, or do I want to go with that position? Do I think a certain way of seeing this tension is more fruitful or more persuasive, or I like it better, for some reason, but it's going to be my choice. I think like both positions were present in classical China when it came to think about is effective strategic action necessarily linked, and it leads to happiness, to also ethical concerns and so on? Or can we think of adaptive action in particular as being very strategic and very effective, and sometimes not leading necessarily to like the well-being of all? So there is a tension there.
Yeah.
And I myself, honestly, going back and forth between the two. Like my personal, like as a philosopher and not an interpreter of classical Chinese texts, my personal position is that any metaphysical theories that we endorse, or any kind of ontological commitments that we have, or that I personally have, I want them to play a role and to be like the source, the basis from which I derive practical action, right? So for me, it's very important that any claims that I make regarding how things are leads me to the kind of political and social action that I consider to be fruitful and that I want to see happening in
Sure.
my daily life and in my world, right? But that is my personal position and view, and I would not ascribe it necessarily, right, to this or that philosopher in China.
Yeah, to be honest, I see that it resonates really very much in your work, especially the second work. I have to admit, this commitment. From the beginning of the book, you make it clear that I mean, I'm talking about All Things Act, the book that you kindly and generously sent a copy to me. You said already in the beginning of the book that I'm quoting you, consequently, agency is conceived to be a distinctively human capacity, and moreover, a capacity that only a certain ideal type of human possesses. I challenge the distinction between mere events and human actions to open up the possibilities to entertain an alternative approach to action and agency, one that is relational, collective, and horizontal. End of quote. To the new non-question, you're welcome.
Yes.
So there I see this commitment is becoming more and more concrete, right? It's not only a kind of a pragmatic understanding of adapting, rather a kind of commitment that only as you said, full blood, I think it's a word,
Yeah,
right?
agents.
Full blooded agent is working. Rather, okay, a woman can also play that role, a non-white can also play that role of agency, a
Yeah.
non-human can also be agent or co-agent, let's say.
I don't know how many people have this reaction when they're reading analytic philosophy of action, like contemporary philosophy of action, written in English mainly. But I do have that very strong reaction when I'm reading it. It's like, oh, I'm definitely not an agent. If that's what it means to be an agent, then I do not act. Many other people don't either, right? Like it seems like it's presented in such ideal terms where it means like this full-blooded agent, right? 100% an agent. It has to meet such high conditions of rationality, right? Of just justifiability, of intentionality. It's translated into like ordinary language. It's like, where have you ever found a person who understand themselves transparently, have like carefully, rationally selected all their values? They're always acting on their values. They know exactly what they want. They also know how to achieve it, and they go for it, and then they express this to others, like in this wonderful manner. It's like such a person does not exist, right? And it is based, this ideal, it's also very disembodied, right? Even though there are many analytic philosophers of action today who are like challenging that and making very important contributions to a more like embodied physical material understanding of agency that is not just like something in your mind, that is completely immaterial, right? And informal. But still, like in general, like the dominant account is very much disembodied. It's like this abstract, neutral agent, like this rational mind, right? That has no way of like engaging with how people really are influenced and impacted by their social roles or their identities and their different social material environments, right? So this is something that I strongly oppose, if even though I don't want to be confrontational and I want to expand, but something that I strongly oppose is the idea of an ideal agent that we or anyone can like say this is what an agent should be, and then we are going to have people fit that idea. And if they don't fit whatever I thought that an agent, the conditions that an agent should meet, then I will consider them to be less of an agent, right? And that in the history of philosophy and the history of the world, that kind of ideal conception that has been very male and very white, right? Very European, has led to considering other people, including women or people of color and people with different religions, or disabled people, right, with as less than humans, right? So what is now discussed as less than an agent, it used to be discussed as less than human, right? More openly. Now we don't say that anymore, but I see a lot of stuff in contemporary philosophy that's still coming from those ideas, even if the language has changed, right? But there's still a manifestation of this substratum of thinking about certain ideals as the norm and everything else as a deviation, right? So
Right.
that is
Okay.
something that I think the more expansive, more relational model of action and agency that I'm working on it's a very good tool to correct
Right.
that kind of problem.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So a little piece of good news for you is that more than half of the questions I've asked. So you will have.
We're
I
halfway
hope
through.
I hope you're not terribly exhausted with the questions.
I'm not. No, I'm
Yeah.
enjoying the
All
conversation.
right, great. So I'm happy to hear that. Another non-question, Mercedes, is I'm quoting you, a focal point to which I dedicate special attention. It's from the beginning of the new book. A focal point to which I dedicate special attention is a principle of irreductionism that comes from Bruno Latour. So irreductionism posits that all relations are equally constitutive of a thing, and that while it is the case that everything is susceptible to being reduced to anything else, ultimately nothing can be reduced to anything else, since there is nothing more real, primordial, or fundamental from which to drive or explain other things. I interpret irreductionism as a methodological response to the phenomena of ontological ambiguity, which comes from Brooks Zipporine, which we approach through the lens of yin-yang model. I would be extremely thankful if you can tell us about this yin-yang model and this ambiguity thing coming from Zipporine in relation
Mhm.
to your interpretation. Sorry for this
Okay.
long demand.
No, sure. Yeah, I think that's like the ontological commitment that I was referring to before. So this ontological ambiguity is the idea that things are neither this nor that, but both and, right? So normally, like in formal logic, like European formal logic, you have like this principle of non-contradiction. If there is A, then if A is true, then non-A cannot be true at the same time, right? This is the opposite, right? This is saying, well, no, things are both A and non-A at the same time, because things are nothing in particular, nothing fixated. They're ambiguous, right? They have the capacity to embrace different modes of being at the same time, right? So it's a principle of contradiction completely inserted at the very being of things, right? So we can think about that with the yin-yang model, I think, because it's a really good image. It makes it very easy to see what we are talking about, right? So, well, yin-yang is a term that everyone is familiar with, right? It comes from classical China and so on. So if in one of the images, how it's explained, it's like the sunny side of a mountain, and then the side of the mountain that is in shadow, in shade, right? So you have a side that is illuminated, the other side that is in the dark. Can you say that the mountain is one side or the other side? It's both at the same time, right? So these two, in being opposite to one another, light and darkness, right? At the same time, they belong together. They're part of one, right? They're like two ways of being at the same time that do not exclude one another, right? And so the yin-yang principle is not only saying that we have two ways of being perceived, right? Like, for example, there is male and female, but really that anything that is female is also male at the same time, and that everything that is male is also female at the same time. Just to use like this dichotomy, male, female, you can use any other one that you like, right? So things don't have an essence. Things are nothing determinate and fixed, right? There is no substance to what things are, but things can become and they have the capacity to behave and to become different things, right? Even opposite things. So with that, if that's, if we think about things in this way as not being essential, but really changing depending our relations to them, then I see that principle of irreductionism as a methodological response to that ontological commitment, right? So if things are ambiguous and ambiguously both this and not this at the same time, and that what they are and how they're manifested in some way depends on the connections, relations that are being prioritized and that are being privileged, then it is our job as philosophers not only to think about the relations that are being prioritized by someone in a certain context, but to think also about all the other ones that are kind of potentially there, waiting to be, awoken perhaps or manifested, but that they may be dormant, but they are not, they don't disappear. They're always there. And they're very much part of the thing as much as those relations that are being prioritized in the moment, right? So any single time that we see something as this, we cannot forget that seeing something as this is just a way of framing it. We're using some points of focus because of our interests, because of our goals, because of our background. We are paying attention to certain things that seem more important or more salient to us, and then we're framing the thing for it to appear as such, right? So as we do that, and we cannot stop doing that because this is how we live, right? This is how we make sense of the world. This is how we get things done and get through ordinary life, right? So irreductionism is not saying stop doing that and live in this like complex network of innumerable relations, right? That could be impossible. But as you're framing issues to be this or that, do not forget that they can also at the same time simultaneously be framed to be something else, and that thing is not anymore what you want it to be in this moment than what it could be and it can be, or maybe what it is by other people prioritizing other relations in that moment, right? So what is important also for me about that principle of irreductionism is that even when we have moved from looking at the world in terms of essences and substances and individual entities, and we are more thinking of it in terms of relations, we still have a tendency to prioritize certain relations over others, to think that certain relations are going to be more important, right? And then they act as a sort of foundation, right, for our framings, right? And in reductionism is saying there is really nothing that is more fundamental, more important, more that should always take priority over other things. All relations should be placed on the same plane.
Right. Thank you. Great. Thank you for the answer. Mercedes, I have once I read this kind of there is this kind of uh, anecdote, fable, I don't know how to call it, this folk tale, this Ukrainian folk tale that you talk about in the book, the fox and the crane, like the fox inviting the crane to eat, but because of their, as you say, dinnerware, none of them are completely satisfied. Once the fox is there, he's disappointed. One crane is there, she's disappointed, if there is any gender there. And as a result, we can infer from that this independence actually does not work completely. So we are all dependent on things that we are not aware of them, right? There is a moment of like awareness of my dependence only when something doesn't work. A very Heideggerian thing that I can remember in the relation between hammer and hand. So, but there is this point for me. So it was correct. Like my report was okay, right?
Yes.
So based on that report, I had this curiosity slash question slash idea that two ways open up to us. When I know there is a moment that I am never completely independent, I am always dependent. And if I feel that I am independent, it is only because of my ignorance that I feel that I'm independent. So two ways open up for me. Either there comes a kind of a heaviness, a burden that I'm always dependent on things and I'm never an autonomous subject, or there comes a kind of tendency even to lightness and to oblivion, even a tendency to say that, okay, I am not the biggest agent, so let's forget about it. Not forget about it in the sense of ignoring, forget about it in the sense of not taking yourself seriously. I tell this, I report that because still humor is also behind all of this interesting for me. The moment that you can take yourself less seriously. So up to you.
Oh, yeah, I like that question a lot. So, yeah, so the main thing, like with this folktale, I discussed this in the concept in the context of powers, right? Like in the more dominant model, we individuals, like some of us are more powerful than others, some of us have more capacities than others, right? Can do more things than others. This is something, the skills or powers or capacities are something that we own, that we have, right? Kind of individually and independently, like you were saying. But the fact that I can write or I can eat with a fork or I can do certain things is not just a function of my personal features and my skills and my abilities. It is also a function of like the very objects and the social and material environment that I'm working with and that I'm inserted in, right? So I consider that to be very important to think about issues like how we think about ability and disability, right? That people who we consider disabled would not be disabled, like less able to do certain things in a world that didn't present such challenges, right, to their personal features, right? So we would all be disabled if we didn't have if like, for example, the entrance to a building required flying instead of like walking up the stairs, right? None of us would be able to fly, right? So we don't realize how much we rely on the material environment in order to have powers, right? To have the possibilities to do certain things, right? So, like you say, like realizing that dependence on social and material environments, on other people and other things for everything that we are and everything that we can do, it can lead to a sort of like, oh my God, like then I have no power, I have no control, I'm nothing, right? Like this defeatist attitude and certain bitterness. It has really it can get into very, very negative reactions. And I have experienced this before, like in audiences who feel like I'm saying that humans are nothing. It almost feels like I'm trying to undermine humans as a species or something. That like saying humans have no power, no control, no independence, and so on. Well, that's some like kind of strong reaction you can get. Another reaction, like you say, is like even like, well, now I don't have to do anything at all, because it's not up to me anyway. I'm just like part of this course of action. I'm participating, but I have no power to make things happen by myself. So why bother? But I think these are two extremes. The attitude or reaction that I would like to nurture in these conversations and in readers is that the getting actually more power and more control and more mastery over one's own actions precisely by acknowledging that they are not our own, right? So it's not defeatist or bitter, and it is also not like, okay, nothing matters, I don't have to do anything anymore. It's more like by acknowledging how dependent we are, all of us, on things and people, and also ideologies and institutions and policies and values and ideas, right? How dependent we are on all that to do the things that we do, then we can actually become more effective agents, and we can create, and not only at the individual level but at collective level, like better social policies and better ways of organizing our societies that are more realistic, that don't expect individuals to have that sort of individual control and power, but that in understanding how dependent we all are, we can actually nurture our agency, in a collective way, for everyone to benefit from it, and not just like certain people. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also admit that there is a kind of hyperbole there. There is a kind of exaggeration in like making them two really extreme
Yeah.
poles, but it makes things clear because I am almost convinced that the tragic view is more dominant. The tragic view that
Yeah.
even in the contemporary like liberal subject, the tragic view is a dominant view because the bitterness, even this ressentiment, is rooted in the fact that okay, I don't have a lot to act. I'm not even talking about disabled people. I'm talking about the liberal free subject that still thinks that okay, he or she is constantly discriminated. You know, nothing against the right to feel discriminated and fight for it, but that comes to another question that I ask later. That was the driving force behind this question. I go to another concept that you also expand in the book, and there is a part about it, the relation between assembly and wu wei, if I could pronounce it correctly.
Yeah.
So you can correct all my pronunciations from English to Chinese, but mostly Chinese. So I quote a part from the book, approaching the phenomena of reversal in Tao Te Ching through the angle of byproduct states, which are optimal states that can only come about from actions undertaken from other ends. I argue that both spontaneity and volition indirectly emerge from decentralized, self organizing networks of actors cooperating without intentionality or global representations, namely through the swarm agency, which is the topic that you really deal with, swarm agency of complex systems described in the previous chapter. So feel free to tell us more about it, please.
Yeah, I think this is, you're pointing with that quote at an insight that I find very, very important, that comes from Chinese philosophy, but that I consider to be very important for us today, which is that sometimes the more effective way of achieving your goals, it's counterintuitive. It's not, by acting directly on something. So, like I think we were saying before, maybe the best way to get control and power is not to like actually require and demand that control and that power, but to participate in channeling things, going in and nurturing things to take on certain trajectories that lead to that kind of goal, right? That you are trying to achieve. So these byproduct states are states that cannot be achieved by direct means, just by willing them, by volition, right? And falling asleep is one of like the classical example, right? Like you need to sleep, you have to wake up early in the morning, but you for some reason you cannot go to sleep. The more that you think, oh my God, like go to sleep now, like you cannot will it into happening. This is not something that you can make happen by wanting it to happen. You have to kind of forget about it, and then you relax and you think about something else, maybe you read a book, whatever, and then it will happen as a byproduct of other actions that are not taken for the end of falling asleep. And the same thing like with something like having fun, right? You cannot like just order yourself to have fun at a party or any event, and actually like the more that you think about it, like, oh, I should be having fun, like the more awkward that it's gonna get, or like the more that you are gonna become an obstacle to yourself, right? So you have to stop thinking into willing yourself into having fun in order for fun to emerge out of a certain configuration of the situation. And I think about volition, right? Like the power of the will, which is another way of talking about intentional action, right? I have an intention. This is what I want. I'm going to make it happen, right? I think about that volition or intentionality also as a byproduct of certain actions that are taken for other ends, and also an emergent quality or property of a certain configuration of action rather than as the source of an action, right? So in the mainstream, I would say, approach to action and agency, what makes a proper actor or agent is this intentionality, this volition, right? Like this, I know what I want, right? And then I'm going to make it happen. So volition is thought as a source of action. It's like the most human source of action. It's what separates humans from everything else, even from non-human animals that are considered by many philosophers still today to have no intentions and no volition. This is not by everyone, but that's changing. But still, like I think it's a very dominant way of thinking that only humans have intentionality and volition, right? So it's seen as a source of action, that this is how I cause something to happen. By means of my volition, I cause something to happen. And what I think is that volition, the way in which I have been analyzing it as a byproduct or an emergent property of certain, what I'm calling sort of agency, but which is just like many things collaborating together in organizing a situation, creating some kind of novelty that is not reducible to the actions and the agents participating in the situation. So as a result of certain agentive configurations, we can say then volition appears as an experience, right? So I experience myself as having the capacity to cause things out of my own will, right? And this is undeniable, right? This is, who can deny that we humans, and I believe also non-human animals, many of them, I experience myself as wanting to drink, then I get my glass and I drink from it, right? So I have caused this by means of my volition, my wanting it to happen, right? Now, what I'm saying is not to deny that we have this experience, but rather to deny that this experience is the cause that is making the action happen. But rather, I think it's an after effect that we experience ourselves as intentional actors and volitional actors. And in having that experience, it also changes how we relate with the environment, right? Because if I experience myself as making things happen, as causing things to happen intentionally, like grabbing this cup of water, then obviously I'm gonna think of myself as having more power than the cup of water, which is just this passive object that I'm utilizing, right? Um, so it informs how we think about ourselves. It informs how we act, and it has an impact. So it is this experience of volition is also an actor, right, in its own right. It has something to add to the whole course of action. But I don't think that it is the cause, the source of what happens as some, like, I don't know, mysterious capacity that only humans have, completely immaterial thing that somehow can translate into physical actions in the exterior world, right? I don't think that's a persuasive account of how things happen. So my take is so much more material in the sense of how different things interact to lead to that action and then lead to the experience of me wanting to do that action and making it happen by myself.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Well, quite similar, I would say, to the concept of agencement or assemblage that is also in Deleuze, which is not a very subjective, intentionally rooted decision that I say that, okay, as you say, the relation between the ice and the sun that you repeat in both books, if I'm not wrong, or in one book a couple of times, this is not based on intention. It is based on the kind of co-action or this kind of co-agency of the sun and the melt and openness of the melt of the ice even, right?
Yes, exactly.
So
So I got like the part of Uwe of your question, like of this um, action based on assemblages or assemblies of things working together. I think the concept of self-organization is very interesting there as well, to understand what happens when different things come together, each of them being different and having different behaviors, but yet in coming together, they create certain ways of regularities in patterns of acting that help certain properties emerge, right? And the characteristic of this is that there is not a central controller of the action, right? There is not like, we would always think of the human as the central controller in any situation, right? It's the subject, like making use and controlling everything around them. And even like in human groups, there might be the idea that, this orchestra director, right, that is actually making other things happen according to their own rules, according to their own will. Decentralization is the idea that things can cooperate with each other and affect and interact with each other, creating regularities and patterns of effective behavior that are not commanded by anyone, by any individual entity, and that are really distributed across the whole network. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, if I'm allowed, I can give you one example that I was like almost 15 years teaching in Iran, and
Yeah.
before I moved to Europe, like between 12 to 14, 15 years, I was teaching there, and I took it for granted. This event, this happening, I took it for granted that okay, it can happen everywhere. So with the same talent, with the same skill, I come to Europe, but you don't have the audience to teach, right? So it sort of reminded me of the example of, or the concept of empathy in your analysis in the book. Because even empathy is not only dependent on the fact of the subject being empathic, it's
Yeah.
also, there is another moment, there is another action, there is another recipient of being empathic, right? So even the very core of our ethics is based on all these kind of constellations, all these kind of cooperations of different agents. You know, the
Mhm.
same Mahdi comes to Europe and is is not able to use his skills just because it should be organized not in the sense of subjectively organizing. The situation should be organized for that to emerge, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So same thing we said with powers or with abilities, also with talent, with emotions, with anything that you put out in the world, right? That it can be typically thought of as something individual, right? Like you have these skills. You have been a teacher for 10 years. How could you not have these skills? You know what you're doing. Then you put yourself in a different context, right? Insert yourself in a different structure. And then suddenly these skills are not there anymore, or somehow they don't find the way, right, to cooperate with the other things in your environment to bring them out.
Right.
And then things need to be relearned, right?
Yeah, no, it is. It can be. It can also have a very poetic side, I should say. You know, like you have this part from Mengzi, unfolding metaphor of sprouts.
Yeah.
If I read it, if I find it here, yeah. So in the dry times of the seventh and eighth month, the sprouts wither, clouds profusely rise in the heavens, gushing rains descend, and the sprouts spring up in vigor. When it is like this, we can stop it. So it's very much it's very beautiful, this view first of all, but also very practical, which is comparable to this. Apparently, there is this saying in Chinese that pulling up the seed to help them
Yeah.
grow, right? To see
Mhm.
seedlings to help them grow. If I'm not wrong, you also write about it. So it also has this facet that somehow it is related to the non-action, right? To the wu wei, to the
Yeah.
non-action, right?
Yeah. It is related to it, and it's paying attention that anything that we are as humans, right? Any capacities or dispositions, or what some people may want to call human nature, right? And that was called human nature for many centuries. or any powers or capacities that we have and we display, they're just not a function of our own features as individuals, that I have these two hands and I have two legs, so I can do certain things, but I don't have wings, so I cannot fly. These are my personal features that I largely cannot control, right? They're out of my control. That's the concept of Min in classical Chinese philosophies, that all those things that escape my control, that are like a given to me, right? Or another way to think about it is like as contingencies, right? I'm born into this body, right? What can I do, right? This is what's given to me, right? So those are my own features, but those are not sufficient to explain what I can do or who I am or how I am as a person, or the values and virtues that I have and that I can perform, or the talents and skills, like you were saying about being a teacher. There is a second contingency that we need to take into account, which is the things that we encounter, right? So we have certain ways of being, but these ways of being, it's only in their encounter with others, right? In those relations that are established, that they become one thing or another, right? So the sprouts is a way of, in the months, in Mencius, it's talking about human nature, or I prefer to call it like human dispositions, or powers, as something that, of course, like we are born with certain ways of being, both physical or also in terms of our cognitive abilities, right? Our emotional responses and so on, which are different from other animal species, right? And they're different, like, say, for example, a fish, right? Different body, different way of interacting, different interfaces to perceive and interpret the environment and so on, but also from objects, right? Inanimate objects and non-intentional things and so on. So definitely we have certain features. We don't need to deny that, right? There is no denying that. But what these features are, what they become, they're just like a sprout. This is a metaphor, right? The sprout will not become a full-blown plant unless it's meeting the right conditions, the right relations, right, in which it can grow and flourish. So we have these features, but they don't amount to basically anything unless certain relations come into play, and then they become something. They become a skill or a virtue, right? And different relations are gonna bring different things out of us. Right?
Great. Definitely. There is, I have like a couple of questions, and then we are done. I hope you have time for them.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So there is, I mean, coming back to the question that I asked earlier, or the digression that I made earlier about this, about the bitterness, this kind of driving force of bitterness in terms of power in the general sense that we have in political discourse. Uh, on the one hand, you have this, and on the other hand, your understanding of powers in the way that you talk in the book. And my question is there, I try to really cautiously formulate that question. Is there any place from that point of view for defining a particular form of resistance here? Or should we only be content with our powers, with the powers, with the contingency of the powers? I mean, there is a kind of these kind of powers that had made you as a philosopher, as a woman philosopher, as a feminine philosopher, to write a book, or for me interviewing you, using this microphone interviewing you, right? Using Zoom to interview you, all of these as powers. But um, my question is that um, what feelings underlie this form of resistance? Can we believe at all in a kind of resistance? Because a couple of times you talk about resistance in the book as like words, really en passant, and it is not necessarily a kind of emancipatory connotation there. Resistance is more like blocking, right? Blocking
Yeah.
these powers. But I'm talking from the point of view that was
No.
also related to your ontological commitment, that
Yes.
as a woman philosopher, you also want to resist this image that only men, white men, can be philosophers, right? Or I want to resist this view that only the like white men can talk about philosophy, not a person carrying the name Muhammad, for example. Yeah, um, that is the point. That is the starting point for me. Is there any any space for defining resistance.
Of course, of course. So I know that when I talk about resistance, it's like I understand perfectly like the sense of resistance that you're bringing up, and it's a very important part of the project, right? So the whole like theoretical metaphysical thing for me, it's like leading here to this question, right, of how it is going to help us like work towards creating a better world, better societies. So like you were saying about me being a woman philosopher, it's obviously not in my in my worldview, not because I'm particularly talented or particular this or that, me essentially individually, that I get to be able to write books or have an interview with you or have like certain platform and stage, to talk and to people to listen to what I have to say. It's not only coming from me, right? There is a lot of other contingencies that have happened in my life that are both social and material that have led to me being able, right, to participate in those trajectories leading, to this moment or any other moment that there might be in the future, right? And if those conditions change and were more widespread for other people as well, then we would have more women philosophers, right? And we would have more female professors in general, not only in philosophy, but like teaching at university and college. And we would have more women politicians and, women with power to change things and to be heard in general, right? So 2 days ago, was it 2 days ago? Yeah, there was like this shooting at a school here in Minnesota. So this happens all the time in the US, right? The school shootings. How I'm thinking about this, it leads to very directly to an analysis of what happens, how we react to what happens when we have one of these shootings right here in the US. You can say, well, this person, the shooter, they are the actor. They are responsible for the action, right? They may have like some mental problem or some kind of issue, but they did this individual action that resulted in harm, and they are like fully accountable and responsible for it, and that's it. And once that person, that actor, is not on stage anymore, then we don't have the problem anymore. Like, the harm is already done, but we are only gonna understand it in terms of this individual action, right? And you see that in how it is reported in the media, how it is discussed, in general terms, like, this always trying to find like they had been bullied in the past, they had some mental issue, like mental health problems and this and that. That explains, like, trying to rationalize or at least justify or explain the individual action of picking up a gun, like any kind of weapon, and like killing people and shooting children, right, or adults. So how my analysis of agency and these like ontological commitments we were talking about and so on leads to a different analysis of these situations, that if you keep thinking in terms of individual actors and actions, then you will never solve the problem, right? Like the fact that this person was able to pick up a gun at a store, that he had at least like 3 different kinds of weapons at the moment. All these things were available and accessible to him, right? These are material conditions that we are talking about, right? That make it possible for this individual action to occur, which makes it, to my mind, already not so individual when it is so dependent on material conditions, right? But it's not only material conditions. We're talking about a lot of precedent, right? In this kind of action, we're talking about a certain ideology about self-defense, right? About a certain culture, about guns and weapons in general, right? That is historical, that is not like from yesterday. All these things that are ideological and that are also social and cultural, they're very much historical and contextual and located, right? As much as the material conditions themselves, like the things that we have, right? And that we work with. So it is only when we understand that action, the shooting, as an action that is distributed across this whole network of different actors, each one of them putting something, contributing something, making something happen. Only when we analyze it as a whole, right, this phenomenon, then we can get a richer understanding of something that no one wants to happen, right? So it's not saying that some people want that to happen. No one wants that to happen. But how to avoid it, right? How to come to an end of a trajectory that leads to that kind of action, right? So I think we have to understand it at a more collective level, right?
Yeah, I think you even answered my next question in a sense. So, but if you don't mind, I just read that because it was a point of curiosity when we were talking earlier about irreductionism. So
yeah,
my digression is that the intriguing point in these theories is the issue of irreductionism, as you also cited Bruno Latour or other philosophers. Yet my concern is and was that um, uh, irreductionism makes a lot of sense, and it is very much inspirational when we take creation or art, as you are referring to examples in methodologies like Cyril Smith or is Malafori's idea on pottery, if I'm not wrong. When it comes to art, this kind of cooperation or the relation between material and human makes a lot of sense. But the point that triggers me still there is that, and you also partly answered, if not wholly, what happens when we speak of destruction? What happens when we talk of war, of genocide, of sanctions, even of killing other human beings, as you had this example. So when I speak of these issues as opposite of creation, how far these theories can go or how helpful they can be, doesn't it lead to a kind of neutralized sense of, targeting these political or these politicians or this kind of regime, this kind of country, or we should simply cope with the fact that we are all responsible for it, or there is no hierarchy in that kind of responsibility. Like my concern there is that the opposite of creation is destruction, and how a kind of irreductionism approach helps.
Yes, thank you. No, that's a great question. So in reductionism, it's saying that all relations are equally constitutive of something, no? At the same time, some relations can and will be prioritized, right, in certain contexts because they are conceived to be more useful or more prominent or more illuminating for something, right? If we think about the case of the shooting again, there are certain relations that are going to come out as more prominent or more relevant, more immediately important or urgent, right, than others. Because the reductionism leads to thinking about everything up to like the beginning of the universe, say, think everything that has happened and how all the relations and configurations that lead to certain thing, right? And they're all equally constitutive and fundamental. However, we focus our attention, right? We can choose contextually kind of like how to frame the situation and the boundaries that we are going to create momentarily, right, to address something or approach something. But it is already like the move from the individual actor to the whole social and material context in which, and historical and cultural, right, and religious and so on, in which the individual actor is inserted and by means of which they become an actor. This is already expanding the circle quite a bit, right? You talked about that bitterness, right? That people think like, oh, you want to take power away from me, right? Like take intentionality and rationality away from me as an individual actor and agent and so on. But I think it's the opposite. Like I find it very optimistic to think that, you are never acting alone. You are never 100% responsible and accountable for the things that you do because you are part of something. What you are is also distributed through that context, that environment, those relations. So you can never be fully responsible for yourself. And this is not to kind of like exime people of responsibility and accountability, but really to think more effectively about our policies and our social life, and especially when it comes to these negative things that we want to avoid, right? Because you said like there is with creation and all that, it's easier to see, how we engage with materials to do something beautiful. But when it comes to something destructive, when we think about everything in our societies that is problematic and that we agree is problematic and we would like to avoid, I think that my account of it is optimistic because it leads to identifying, analyzing, understanding like the whole network or the whole context or environment that leads to creating a certain trajectory that then will a certain degree of probability, finalize like some action, like get materialized in some sort of action, right? And then we can actually like create policies that reflect that understanding and that might be more effective in ending those results, those outcomes that we don't like.
Right.
So like for me, like how this translates in very real practical terms in the case of the shooting, like I think the shooter in this case, like it is the case of them died, killed himself, or I think. But in the case that the shooter had survived, like making them responsible only for the action and putting this person in jail, that wouldn't be like a good solution, right, to the situation. It couldn't be a way of addressing the issue. It could be just like a little band-aid that doesn't really heal and address the problem, right? So we would have to think about how many other actors are responsible and should take accountability in that action and in that outcome, and like judge them really with the same level of rigor and produce the changes that need to happen, right, in order to avoid that happening again in the
Right.
future.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. So my last question is a part of the book. Towards the end of the book, you talk. I mean, you already talk about the function of mirror, but there are also the rock and the fish. So I like this part that, I mean, the rock comes from the military philosophy classic Sun Tzu's Art of War, where we encounter a vivid image of the round rock coming down right from the mountain. And they're all materials, they're all means of that, making that rock that deadly and that fatal and that heavy and that powerful. So I liked it, and I leave it to you to tell us about these three things or two of them. I mean, because the mirror you can also, yeah, if you like.
Yeah, sure. So there's certain images in Chinese philosophy that they're beautiful and memorable, and they help us like grasp certain ideas very well. The concept of shi, or that momentum or trajectory that emerges from certain configurations of actors, that's what is like illustrated by the rock. So we have this rock. A rock doesn't have like the ability to initiate movement, right? It cannot move by itself. However, we can also not say that the rock does not move, right? So there is this image in the Art of War in which the rock can hit a target that is like down the ravine, like down the river, with a lot of precision and very effectively. Well, we're thinking about war, so we are thinking about actually killing someone with that rock, right? But this is the image. And the rock is able to do that, right? To create that outcome, not by its own means, but really by its relation to the environment. That's something that set it in motion, something that helps it like gain speed and power and so on and so forth, right? So it's this concept of trajectories, right? Instead of thinking a linear action initiated by an individual actor leading to a certain outcome that is intended and willed, right, with our volition, It is more of like a certain configuration, put something in motion at certain trajectory that can lead somewhere, right? And that is precisely what we were talking about earlier with the shooting, or like the political consequences of this, is that instead of thinking of individual actors doing things, we need to think about how to shape better trajectories, right, that lead to the outcomes that we find desirable and that we want to see, and understand, analyze like the configurations that lead to those trajectories, like school shootings, that we want to avoid, right? So that's the rock. Then you said, yeah, we talked about the mirror, and then there is the fish, right? So this is the story of the happy fish. It's also in the Chuanzi. And it says you have Chuanzi as a character there, walking and talking just leisurely with his friend Huizi. They're both philosophers. They're not doing anything. They're just like having fun, like walking together and talking and so on. And they are walking through on this bridge through a river, and then they notice there are fish swimming in the river. And then Chuanzi says, "Oh, look at those happy fish," or they're just so happy swimming around, right? And like just wandering around. And then his friend says like, "Oh, how can you even know that the fish are happy? You're not a fish yourself, right? So you cannot know this." And Johnson says, "Well, you're not you, so how can you know what I know or what I don't know, right?" And that like leads to like this very entertaining kind of back and forth. And at the end of the day, then Johnson like says like, "Okay, let's go back to your initial statement. You said that I know about the happiness of the fish from this position, from looking at them, right? From the river, from the bridge." Um, and what it means, right, is like what the point that Chuanzi is making is not so much that the fish are happy in his own conception of happiness, and that of course he can know about that, or that they are happy or not happy. That's not the point. The point is that he's relating to his environment in a way in which he's resonating with things. He's making meaning out of things without imposing any particular views or identities or values. So in the same way that he's just like walking around with his friend with no particular goal or sense of time, just like talking and not even feeling your body or anything, just like being very much like at one with the environment and with the other person that you're talking about, not feeling like you are a separate entity, but really part of something, and feeling the time in this more processual way. He looks at the fish and he says, "Well, the fish are doing exactly that as well, right? So this is how I'm interpreting my environment. This is how I'm responding to this environment in this open-ended way of making meaning together, as opposed to like trying to fixate and control and make distinctions, right, in the way that the friend wants to do." Right. So this speaks about a certain attitude. Again, when we think about the world as always being in transformation and as being ambiguous, or neither this nor that, but both and at the same time, then the attitude of co-creating meaning, co-creating moments of joy and happiness, and also co-creating solutions, right, to the problems that we see in our worlds, and so on and so forth. It takes more priority than trying to impose yourself, who you are, who you want, your identity, your values, and your goals, right? And creating these separations and these boundaries with respect to everyone else.
Right.
So that's what that image
Right.
talks.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. That was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for the books and the ideas. I mean, that was very much enriching.
Thank you so much, Maddie, for listening to me for like 2 hours.